Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of our podcast here at KPC. We're glad to have you listening in. And again, whether this finds you in your car, on a commute, or at the gym, or on a walk, or whether you're watching on YouTube, we're grateful to have you. And we hope that some of our conversation helps you have conversation. So we're jumping into Luke 5. On Sunday, we preached through Luke 5, 1 to 11. And it's the story of Jesus calling his first disciples. In the Gospel of Luke, it's great because it's a little longer than some of the other ones. In Matthew, Jesus is just really direct, come follow me, and they go. And here there's actually this intentional progression of conversation and events that happen. It's linked to a miracle. So there's a lot happening in just a few short verses. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that, about what happens to Peter in this interaction with Jesus, and the invitation to become a disciple. What does that look like? And what might it look like for us? What are some practical ways to live out being a disciple? So just to name a few, what we're going to get into today, we're glad to have you. And we're looking forward to a good conversation.
Yeah, this is a great passage. It was a lot of fun. Grant alluded this. You alluded to this in your sermon that we have been getting together weekly. Yourself, me, often Allison, formerly Pastor Allison, currently layperson, but still awesome Allison. We get together and we unpack these texts, and we had a lot of fun with this one, trying to look at the different pieces, the different angles. There's a lot here. So one of the questions that came up for me was looking at Simon Peter's kind of trajectory here in this passage. It's interesting to see him go from this person kind of on the sidelines. He's not really participating in what's happening. He's just minding his business, finishing up his unsuccessful haul from the night before. And then it goes from that to Jesus is on his boat. He's asking to use his boat and to go out a little further into the shore. And then Jesus tells them to go cast their nets. And then Simon Peter has this sort of freak out moment of like, no, Jesus, get away from me. I'm a terrible person. I'm a wretched sinner. And then at the very end, they drop everything and follow him. And so the first question, and this is kind of a two-parter, for Simon Peter, is this his conversion moment?
Yeah, that's a hard-ish question to answer. I think the answer is yes and no. And like we've talked about this a little bit, it seems to me like this is a moment of conversion for Simon, and you can see a couple different things that make it clear that that's, I think, what is happening. The first is that he's called Simon at the beginning, and then he is called Simon Peter in verse 8, and it's linked to Simon seeing the miracle. So he sees the what Jesus does, this great catch of fish, the nets begin to break. And it says, when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man. So there's something in Simon that sees Jesus differently at the beginning of the story when he's just fishing, or cleaning his nets after having fished all night, to this moment in the narrative. And you say, well, that's fine. That's just a nickname, whatever. Like, it's Luke using both of Simon's names.
But names have meaning.
But this is it. Names have meaning. And it seems to me to be very intentional that he's just Simon. And then a few verses later, now he's Simon Peter. And it's at that exact moment that Jesus performs a miracle. And it's almost as if he sees Jesus for who Jesus is in some way, like for the first time. And it's interesting because in chapter 4, Jesus has just healed Simon's mother-in-law. And so, if you, without going too far down this rabbit trail, which I don't think we need to today, if you take that order,
chronologically,
as a chronological order. This is now the second miracle that Simon has seen Jesus do. So first he's healed the mother-in-law, and then now he has seen Jesus do what he knows. Like, I get with the healing one. You're like, well, Simon's like, I'm not a doctor. I'm not really sure what's going on here. Like, this is his sandbox.
Yeah.
Like, this is his domain. It's what he knows. It's what he is expert in.
He would have known the impossibility of
Right.
what occurred in that lake.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, I don't want to read too much into to Jesus healing Simon's mother-in-law, and what Simon's reaction to that would have been. But in this story, there's no question that Simon's like, this is everything that shouldn't happen. And there's no way to explain this other than miracle.
Yeah.
This is Jesus doing something miraculous. And I got to be very intentional with that word. That miraculous is a hard one for me to say quickly.
Sure.
So I think, yes, this is a conversion moment for Peter. And it is also one of many. So the thing that I like to push back on with conversion all the time, I think this is because I come from a more, mainline Reformed denomination that doesn't actually put as much emphasis on a single moment of conversion, where in an instant everything is changed. I like to talk about moments and instants where everything changes. And without a whiteboard here, which, at some point maybe we'll have, I think we can get into this, what's called bonded set mentality.
I love that. Did a whole class on that in seminary. Yeah.
So here's a box where to be a member of said box, you have to check all of the mini boxes that qualify you. So easiest way to talk about this is like country club. You're trying to join a golf course. It's very clear. You have to pay your fees. You have to dress a certain way when you show up. You have to do a certain number of things, and you can't do other ththings.
This sounds a little like some churches.
You are in or you are out. This is exactly it.
Yeah.
We wrestle. Christianity, I think, has always wrestled with country club spirituality, where you pay your dues and you receive benefit. And you look a certain way and you act and you talk and you speak a certain way and you don't do certain things. And, it's very homogenous. Everybody kind of looks the same and acts the same. And so bounded set. I see, it's in that type of community, it's very easy to see the moment you are in and the moment you are out. And I think Jesus is offering for the church this other way of being, which, this like center set model of organization. In a center set, everything is defined by your movement toward a center. And so I would say Jesus, and, if I had to name like a theological reality, I would say resurrection. So for me, bodily resurrection is center set. This is Jesus's teaching, all of his life, the miracles he performed. It is his death and his resurrection. That's the center set, like, point to which we are oriented.
And we are in a constant state. I mean, many of us on our journeys are in, we're moving toward that.
Yep.
We're moving toward the resurrected Christ. Some of us in seasons, there have been seasons of my life where I am moving away from that in some ways, right? And I would not say that was like that was not a deconversion moment. It was just that I'm moving away from that center set idea of Christ in the center. Yeah.
And I think for each of us, like, you can see seasons of life and also behaviors and habits and things that draw us closer or move us further away. And so membership is defined by your movement toward or away from that center set. And it's much harder to describe accurately the person who would be a member, because you could have somebody who's grown up in the church their entire life, who knows every single story, who has participated in every church choir and pageant and play and Christmas this, and who is moving further away from that center. Yeah. And you can have somebody who woke up drunk in a ditch and who stumbles into church because they know they need something outside of themselves. Mm-hmm. And that person is moving toward the center.
It kind of feels like Peter's like somewhere in the middle there.
Yeah.
Like Peter's messy.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Peter, I think for a lot of people, like Peter is many people's favorite disciple.
Yeah.
Right. Like there are these moments. So
I've got a soft spot for him.
Absolutely. What we see in Peter is this movement, and this absolutely is a moment of conversion. But what do we see Peter do? We see Peter jump out of the boat to walk on water and then start to sink because of his mixture of faith and doubt and keeping his eyes fixed on Jesus, looking down, seeing the waves. Like there's this, that is this great moment where, you know, again, he's wrestling. Peter is going to deny Jesus, that he knows Jesus, right? Sitting around a fire, and you know, people say, "Hey, aren't you?" That camera just died, but that camera didn't, so we're good to go.
Great.
You know, aren't you a friend of this guy Jesus? And Simon's in fear of being the next to be crucified. He says, "No, I don't know that guy." Right? Like I don't know him. Like, what are you talking about? And then he denies Jesus. He denies knowing Jesus 3 times, and then post resurrection, we get this great restoration of Peter. This moment where Jesus again calls Peter, and so I think, are there moments where we know and believe and feel and experience the love and the grace of God, as well as our own sinful reality, a need for a savior, a need for a Messiah? Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And is there going to be likely a moment that is for many of us the main moment where, you know, whether it's we've grown up in the church and we own it in a different way, you know, maybe it is a deep conviction of our own sinfulness. Maybe it is in an instant, like Paul, right, who is blinded, hears the voice of God, he hears Jesus saying, you know, "Why are you persecuting me?" His entire life is turned around at that point. Yes, there are going to be those significant moments, but I think we make it harder on ourselves in some ways. We make it easier to fall into notions of guilt and shame, and, you know, the do I need to be baptized again because I got baptized once? Like, do I need to be baptized a second time? Yeah. And I'm moving away, and now I'm moving toward guilt around those movements and wrestling with doubt. I see it all through deconstruction. Like, I think there's I don't know if this is statistically true, but I think anecdotally it feels like more people coming out of rigid evangelicalism are deconstructing.
I feel like that's true. When I hear folks' stories, it really does seem that there was a real rigidity in the way in which they experienced their faith growing up, and whereas I've seen people that have come from healthier backgrounds, healthier in the sense of there was, you know, room for questions, room for doubt, and often they are doing okay. You know, it doesn't mean, like, I would say I categorize myself as someone who grew up in a church where I could ask questions, I could deal with stuff, I could wrestle without being demonized, you know?
Right. And there's not that instant, like, you know, the unhealthiest of responses to whether it's doubt or deconstruction, asking questions. So for starters, like, doubt and question is a part of faith. Like, to doubt, doubt is not the antithesis of faith.
No.
And it is a vibrant, it is a necessary part of a vibrant faith, I would say, right? So you don't get, there's a great quote, and I can't remember who said it, but you don't get to experience the fullness of faith without also wrestling with, in a healthy way, doubt. Like, doubt is part of it. the unhealthiest of responses that I see are when somebody just says, well, they were never a Christian to begin with. If they deconstructed, if they are no longer a Christian, like, must mean that they were never a Christian to begin with. Like, how sad of a position to take, true or false, about that individual. Just this kind of dismissive, they don't matter, right? Like this kind of easy, like, well, that's their problem. And I want for us to be a church that is okay with questions and doubt, and this journey that we're going to see the disciples go on, which I think I alluded to on Sunday. Like, Jesus is going to send them out, and someone with an impure spirit, with a demon, is going to come to the disciples, and they're not going to be able to heal. So they've seen Jesus heal. Jesus says, go and do the same thing. They're like, we can do it. And they try, and they fail, and they come back to Jesus, and Jesus has this great line. He's like, well, of course you couldn't. That kind can only come out with prayer and fasting. Like, didn't you know? Right. But it's this wonderful story of moving toward and alongside with Jesus. And it's honest because it's filled with doubt and failure and question and wrestling and seeming like these moments where you're like, that's it for this guy. Like, there's no coming back from this. Peter denying he knows Jesus. Jesus has just died on the cross. Like, he's died on the cross, and Peter's out there just straight lying that he doesn't know him. Like, there's no coming back. There's no coming back from that, except for that there is, because that's the beautiful piece about forgiveness and reconciliation. So the last thing that I'll say is that there does need to be, I think, for every one of us, these moments of repentance. And literally in Greek, we're talking about turning around. So my life was moving in this direction. To repent, metanoia, is to stop, to turn, and then to proceed in a new direction. The implication is like 180 degrees, right? Like this turning. That to me sounds a lot like the center set. And there probably will need to be many metanoias, repentance, turning around moments in our lives. There's probably going to be, like I said, a significant one. But like, let's not fool ourselves. At that point, we're still not perfect. So call it, justification, sanctification, to use like the theological church terms. All of it, I think, is what Peter's going through.
It'd be interesting at some point, not today, but to explore, like different faith traditions have different orders of salvation, right? And to, I went to a Methodist seminary that the order of salvation is different from what you would have learned in your Reformed seminary, right? And so it'd be interesting to sort of compare notes. But even within those different traditions, you get, looking at the example, like just thinking of like, take an individual who grew up in the church, they were baptized as an infant. And that is a moment where they're not even fully conscious of that moment, but they are being invited into church community. They are being invited into the family of God in a significant way. And then if the family, stays in the church or a church, the idea is that they would go at some point through some sort of catechesis, right? That they would learn and grow in their heart and head knowledge of the things of God, and that there are moments in there to align, to turn toward God in various ways where they, I think often we use the phrase, we make our faith our own. This was the faith of my family and I want to make that faith my own now, and it's just interesting to think through, even just like, practically speaking, what that journey looks like for us. And I know that we do a lot of thinking about that, and it's different from what I grew up in, which was often like, you go to let's say a vacation Bible study or something as a kid, and you have this very specific moment. And I don't like reject that moment. I don't say that was nothing. I think it was something, but I think sometimes the risk that we run with sort of I'm going to describe it as a more Western individualistic, non-denominational approach to conversion is that sometimes it just feels like it's in question a lot of the time, you know, like I remember going to these big, youth rallies and constantly feeling like, oh, I need to recommit. I need to recommit. I need to do this again. I've really messed up this past year, even at like the age of 12. Like, what was I doing at 12?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a piece of that is so similar in the traditions, right? And that is like what you're saying, recommit. Like I'm saying, I think there's these healthy not reconversion, but like continuing conversions. But the language around it matters.
Yes.
Because what we're not saying, at least what we're saying we don't want people to wrestle with is, was I ever saved to begin with?
And I think I did question that, you know? Yeah, which
Yeah.
I don't think was healthy. And I wish I had someone telling me this, Yeah.
Which is why like language matters
Yeah.
around how we describe these events in our life. It's interesting because so I grew up in the Reformed tradition. I grew up in the Presbyterian Church, and so like I went through catechism, and in our class, like typically you study or you move through one of or both of our confessions. So we have in the Presbyterian Church in Canada these, a subordinate standard, which it's subordinate to Scripture. It is lesser than, but still we believe like theologically significant. And so we have the Westminster Confession of Faith, and it's a series of questions. The Westminster Confession of Faith, the shorter catechism there is it's a series of questions and answers. And it's the same with the Heidelberg Catechism. So you take the Heidelberg Catechism, the first question, and it'd be hilarious if I got these backwards. And the Heidelberg Catechism, the first question is, what is your only hope in life and in death? And so the short answer, it's longer than this, but my only hope in life and in death is that I belong to Jesus, my faithful Savior, Jesus Christ, who is, it goes into then, salvation theology around atonement, and who's purchased my salvation, forgiveness of sins, and that language is I can't get the exact answer, but that's what is your only hope in life and in death, that I belong to my faithful Savior, Jesus Christ. So two things. One, that's a powerful identity statement to be wrestling with as a kid, early, like teenage years, in that sort of in between, like preteen, whatever, 12, 13, 14. Powerful question to be wrestling with around identity. But by definition, it begins by asking a question. So it validates questions in a way that I didn't realize as a kid. Same with the Westminster Confession. It's what is the chief end of man? The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever.
We taught that to our daughter last night on our ride home from dinner at my in-laws.
So amazing.
We were talking about, she didn't want to listen to music. She's like, look, can we just talk? And I was like, oh, this is great.
Yep.
And, somehow it veered into like, what's the meaning of life, Iris? And sure enough, we're like, okay, let's talk about this. And funny enough, the Westminster Shorter Catechism came up.
Like, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that it begins with questions. And it has answers. Like it's you're memorizing these questions and answers. You're talking about what they mean. You're exploring your understanding of them and experience of them for sure. But I like that by definition, what it is saying is we're comfortable asking questions.
Which is great. I know some folks who grew up in other kind of much more rigidly reformed denominations who had a very poor experience going through their catechesis, like where it felt like it was just information being jammed down one's throat. And maybe that was just their experience, but many of them have since, ultimately walked away from faith or been very embittered toward this branch of faith. But when you explore it at its core, it's questions, and they're beautiful and good to explore. And so like when we approach this well, it feels like it can be a really healthy thing.
Yeah. The Heidelberg Catechism question is like a deeply personal one to me. which is funny because I can't tell you the full literal answer, right? Again, I think that goes to speak to my personal upbringing, which was less about just knowing the right answer, literally, and more about exploring, like, no, like, do you know the content of the answer?
Yeah.
And so, I still remember the pastor that took me through that, membership, catechism, communion, like that year of my involvement in church. But the very first pastoral care visit that I went on with my dad, which wasn't actually like intentionally pastoral care visit, but it was a pastoral visit. And that may be nonsense that I just said, but it wasn't intended to be like pastoral care from a pastor to a parishioner. My dad is a pastor, and at the time was at one of the theological colleges, and we were visiting like longtime family friends of ours, and one of them was terminally ill, and this was like this was the last time we were going to see them. And at the end of that visit, that's the question. Like I remember my dad stepping into that moment and using that question to basically say, this. You know where this ends. And it was that he posed that question. What is your only hope in life and in death? To someone who was like knocking on death's door.
Yeah.
And it was I remember it being this significant moment, this beautiful moment where it did tap in for this individual. It tapped into something that was so deeply rooted in who they were. They're like, oh yeah, I know this language. I know this God. I know this Jesus. I know this peace in the face of what for her was her last season on earth. And I don't remember the details of how long then she lived for, or when she did die. But I do remember that being like a significant moment. I was like, oh, these things matter. Like it's not just about memorization for memorization's sake. It's not just about learning the right answer. It's about like, how do we get these things, the things of God deeply embedded into who we are.
I almost liken it to, I've been in, in rooms with folks who are in palliative care, and I've gone into a room and they wanted me to just sing some hymns to them. Right.
Yep.
And what a profound experience, because that's like their heart language, that the stuff that they have it's not about memorizing the words, and most of the time they're barely conscious, but they are encountering those words and the melodies and the memories of singing those songs in their youth and young adulthood and beyond. And it's formed them spiritually in a significant way. And I think when we approach these things like the catechisms and whatnot, like when we approach them in a healthy way, that's what it feels like.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
and
good.
Like music is a wonderful gift in that regard. Yeah. The last thing that I want to say just about Simon, his this moment of conversion for him is that it does seem like he is he sees something that maybe some of the others don't, which is that when everybody, at least it reads to me like when everybody else is still focused on the fish, the catch of fish, it's like Simon's eyesight goes from the fish to Jesus. And so he's not reacting to the fish anymore. He's reacting to the one who performed the miracle.
Yeah.
And I think that's also something that needs to happen in our lives, that we can get distracted sometimes, even with the good things that God is doing, and forget the one who's doing them. And it's when he's confronted, not necessarily with the fish, but with the power of Jesus, who could do this thing that is not possible. He goes, oh, okay, I need to confront the reality of who I am.
Yeah.
And that is essentially, I think that in many ways is what conversion, or what the Christian call to a healthy conversion is. It's allowing who Jesus is to confront who you are in a way where you cannot say anything but, oh, like, okay, this means something about who I am. Yeah. If you are who you say you are, that means I need that changes how I need to see myself. And it's a weighty moment for Simon here.
Can we dive into that moment a little bit more?
Yeah.
So he sees this amazing thing happen. He turns to Jesus. It says he fell at Jesus's knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." Like that's a heavy response. And I can feel that. I can feel that response. And again, I think that we can very easily identify with Peter. I know that I can. When I think about moments in my life where I am confronted with who Jesus is and who I am, I sometimes want to, like, rather than draw Jesus closer, there is this, I want to push Jesus away, because that's easier. Cause then I'm not going to be so intensely confronted with the reality of my state. Right. But what else is going on here for Peter? So he's confronted with Jesus. Is there something, okay, so is there something good in Peter's response? Is there something perhaps unhealthy in Peter's response?
I think it's both. Again, it's hard to, you want to be careful. And you know this, we talk about this all the time. Like, we do need to be careful with reading intent into these words, like that we would know exactly what Peter is thinking as he says these words is a difficult task. Yeah. Just like that we would know what the author's motivation is, intention is. Like, what we have is what's in front of us.
And we can muse over it, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we have to be careful to not place eternal meaning in what,
and it's where I think you need to acknowledge that it's where we run the risk of reading our own pieces into it.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, again, it just is. Yeah. Right. Like it is just a way in which we approach texts.
Yep.
So what we have is Simon saying, "Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man." And on the one hand, I read that and I go, what a beautiful, wonderful, convicted, confronted moment for Simon, where he really does realize who he is.
Refers to him as Lord, Kyrios.
He refers to him as Lord here. Yeah. When it was teacher at the beginning, now it's Lord. What he realizes is that he's not worthy. If this Jesus is the Son of God, if he is the Messiah, if he is who he's now showing himself to be, like, I am not holy to be in the presence of God. I think that's part of what he's thinking and realizing. And there's a piece of that is accurate and healthy. He is one who needs Jesus to be Lord. I think there's also a way, though, that you can read it where, and this, I don't think is necessarily a stretch because of the way Jesus responds. So again, like, once you expand out from just this one line, where you could read it and see Peter is pushing, saying, "Go away from me. I'm not worthy. I'm not holy. You're holy. I'm not. You're clean. I'm unclean. I can't be here. Like, this is not, like, you're going to be unclean for associating with me. Like, it's that level of like just rejection on this from what he knows around personal religious understandings of holiness and purity and unholiness and ritual cleanliness and ritual uncleanliness. There's this attempt in Peter's response to just completely distance himself, but then we get Jesus's response, which is, "Don't be afraid." But don't be afraid. Which is not like, he's not saying just believe. For Jesus, it's not, oh, you just need to believe, or, oh, your sins are forgiven, or, Jesus doesn't go the holiness route. He goes the fear route, which says to me that there's something in Simon and Peter who, in seeing Jesus for who he is terrified. And that's how he responds, is out of fear. Fear for what this means for him, fear for what this means for his friends, for his community, for people, like what is happening? Because then Jesus says, "Do not be afraid."
I wonder if there's things going on in the back of his mind, because as you've said, he would know some of the purity, cleanliness, uncleanliness laws, but also, some of these stories of people encountering in the Hebrew Bible, encountering God in a significant way where there's holy ground, and it's like, you need to be prepared for that. And Peter's like, I'm not prepared for this.
Yeah. And you got to wonder too, like there's reason to believe at this point, likely a good chunk of time has passed. So, what we get in and again, this is like you tread into like not fringe, like dangerous territory, but just like the outside edges of maybe what's helpful all the time.
Yeah.
But in Luke 1, 2, 3, you get this order of events where there are connecting words. Everybody's being baptized. When they're all being baptized, Jesus is also baptized too. And then there are, get the sense like immediately, right? Full of the Holy Spirit, he left the Jordan and was led by the Spirit to the wilderness. So that's like a very immediate move. Then from there, he returned to Galilee, and the power of the Spirit is on him. He's teaching. And then we get, then he went down to Capernaum. And then when he left the synagogue, he went to the home of Simon. Then he heals Simon's mother-in-law. So now we're at the end of 4. In 5, it just says one day.
So there's a chance, and not that it ultimately matters in the grand scheme of things, but there's a chance that this could be chronologically out of order in some way.
Well, at very least, what I think scholars, mostly agree on, like there's a time break here.
Yeah.
So the baptism, temptation, first healings, casting out the impure spirit, like there's very good reason to read those as events in quick succession.
Yeah.
They're connected on the timeline. Now we have time passing.
Right.
And so one of the things that I've wondered about this passage is, does Simon know Jesus at this point? Does he know Jesus prior to this event? Again, likely so. We've got the healing of his mother-in-law. Some people suggest that Jesus has been in Capernaum and in the surrounding area, on that shore of Galilee for about a year at this point. So, we're no longer at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. A lot has taken place that Luke doesn't include. Jesus goes and he teaches in these other synagogues, and there is a lot of ministry that happens. And, one of the questions that I have wondered is, and I think there's good reason to believe, regardless of the timeline that's passed, like something in Simon sees Jesus differently. Yeah. And I wonder if it is that he calls him teacher at the beginning, epistata, which is about, like we said, like it's knowledge based. This is a good teacher, but a good moral teacher, one with knowledge and wisdom. But It's not the same as when he calls him Lord, which, to a teacher, they demand your knowledge and your intellect. A Lord demands everything of your life. And I think there's a moment for Peter where his eyes are open to see Jesus as Lord, as Messiah, as Son of God. And it's almost like at the beginning he sees him as a human, and now he sees him as God. And that would be terrifying.
Totally. Yeah.
Especially if it's someone you know.
Yeah.
Like for your eyes to be opened in such a way that you see this person you thought was pure human to now also be fully God.
There's something then so profound and something for us in Jesus's response.
Yeah.
That gives me makes me emotional even as I think about it, of that even Simon Peter in this state of almost sort of almost wanting to say get away from me. I'm no good. I'm not going to be helpful for you. And Jesus is like, no, don't be afraid. And he draws close. That gives me hope. That gives me hope that no matter our state or our conceived state before God, God draws near to us. And we see that in Christ here.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the gospel being played out in real time. And like you've said, in a way that hopefully says to anybody, this is God's desire, is to draw close. This is what we see all through the Old Testament, right?
So good.
God moving toward humanity.
So you alluded to this a moment ago, and this is kind of the final thing I wanted to touch base around was the ultimate response here. So Jesus says to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people." What was the other phrase? The way that you phrase it is.
Yeah, so a couple different ways, but I will send you out to catch people. Yeah, is one of them.
Which could sound funny in our modern vernacular.
Yeah, you can't take that all the way to its logical end, right? That the analogy breaks down. From now on you will catch people. Yeah, is I think actually closer to the literal translation.
So there's a shift there. So don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people. So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. And often, we like to use language of sometimes even favoring the phrase follower of Jesus versus Christian, right? Because it describes what a Christian is. So it's in some ways it makes more sense to use. But the disciples here, they had a Jesus in front of them to literally follow, right? Where they could literally drop their things and literally follow him, right? This is sort of a two-parter. On one hand, we are called to follow Jesus in abstraction, in a way, we are not literally following Jesus in the way the disciples did. We are called to follow Jesus and to follow his commandments, follow his directives for our lives, follow him as Lord of our life, that everything we do and say would be directed by him. But then there's this other piece of the everything. What does it look like to follow Jesus and drop everything? Because that's for us, we have obligations, we have families, we have jobs, we have things that we do that we sing songs I'm thinking of the old hymn "I Surrender All," and there's some people that have jokingly said, well, we should probably more accurately sing I surrender some,
Yeah. I surrender 10%.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
But,
and so what does everything mean? What does everything mean?
Yeah.
What does following Jesus look like? What does everything mean?
Yeah, that there's part of me that wants to say we don't have time to answer the question, what is everything? And at the same time, I think it is comically, like the King James version just nails the translation.
Forsook all.
Forsook all. They forsook all.
Love it.
And I do think that the idea of leaving everything, it's the leaving that maybe is the challenge. And that's why actually I think the hymn, I surrender everything, is even actually more accurate still. Like it's easy to see for the disciples here, they left everything. Well, like you've said, they literally got to walk behind Jesus and follow him to the places where he taught and ate and slept. And, you know, they saw him interact with people every single day. That was the call of a disciple, was to walk behind your teacher and to learn their teaching and to then begin to do some of those same things. And then eventually to be sent out. Like if you were successful, you yourself became a teacher. And so it's very literal here for these disciples, in that they leave their boats, they leave their nets. In Matthew, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, it even says they left their father in the boat.
See, Dad.
Yeah. And it is a great image. Like their lives are you know, shooken.
Yeah.
They're shook.
Yeah.
Like they're rattled. Everything changes for them. And you know, Jesus does have he's got these radical statements, like, unless someone is willing to leave their father and mother and come, you know, follow me. Like there's the rich man who goes away sad because he can't give up everything. Right. And he realizes what Jesus is asking of him. And he goes away sad because he's not able to comprehend this, like, well, like, how could you ask me to do that? So the everything, I really do think, is everything. It's something that we struggle with. I don't think Jesus is saying abandon everything and go out into a desert and, you know, sit in solitude and read the Bible.
Though some have done that.
Some have done that. You know, most of them for the sake of coming back with helpful theology and visions of God and prayers being answered, like words from God being delivered for the sake of community. Like most of the, you know, early monastics, there's this intentional withdrawal for the sake of return. Some just go forever and just, you know, that's part of it. But, you know, it's, I don't think Jesus is calling you to, you know, leave your accounting firm if you're an accountant. I think he's saying, don't, like, if you are a follower of Jesus, he might be saying, leave your accounting firm. He might be saying, walk away from your law practice. He might be saying, go into ministry. He might be saying, don't go into ministry. What is necessary is that for the follower of Jesus, that everything is actually the inverse, that there's nothing that you get to wall off and protect from Jesus. So there's nothing that you get to hold back and keep because it's comfortable or safe, or you don't want to talk about it, or you don't want to deal with it. Like, don't live compartmentalized lives. So human beings, like, we can live really disintegrated lives. And we've talked about this on Sundays. We've talked about this a little bit, like that we're good at having our work friends and our home friends, like our family friends and our couples friends and our friends from childhood when we were single, and our church friends and maybe small group, and then colleagues. And, you know, it's always really awkward. You're like, when you meet somebody in the wrong setting, you're like, I wasn't prepared for this. You bump into somebody from work when you're at, you know, shopping at the mall, or when you're at a, I don't know, Blue Jays game or something. Like, you're doing something, you're like, this is not supposed to happen.
Yeah. What do we talk about?
Yeah. And, you know, I think what Jesus is saying is that all of your life is now integrated into being a follower of Jesus. Timothy Keller says that to be a disciple, like one of the primary things it does is it reshapes, it reforms your identity, all of who you are around the person of Jesus. And so again, that the everything, leave everything, it's not as simple as just saying, well, quit your job and sell all your resources and, become a monk or a priest or a minister, whatever. Like that's not the call.
Yeah.
The call is to say, open hands. There's nothing that I'm going to hold back. Everything will be defined by Jesus. So I don't get ultimate say over my money. I don't get ultimate say over my work, my job. I don't get ultimate say over my family, how I raise kids, don't raise kids, how I am a spouse, how I'm not a spouse. Like there's no piece that is mine that you're not also saying, Jesus, this is yours. Shape it around who you would have me be.
Which is really scary.
Absolutely, it is.
It's, I mean, and you can almost imagine, going back to Peter, like just this realization that he's like, he is Lord. And if he's Lord, that means everything. Like, and that means a shift in how I approach my whole entire life. And then he did just that, obviously.
Yep.
But yeah, you see that there.
Yeah. So, and again, here's the difference. I think many people would rather keep Jesus at arm's length as a good moral teacher.
Yes.
You're like, I can buy the teachings, the love one another, the love your neighbor as yourself, I can buy so much of his good moral, ethical teachings.
And you could argue like the world would be a better place if we just followed the ethical teachings of Jesus. You could make that case.
And you can also point to where the church and Christians have failed.
Yeah.
So just because you call yourself a Christian follower of Jesus, we're not perfect at doing it. And worse than that, you can look at moments in history where it is just so counter the teachings of Jesus, even just the teachings of Jesus.
Yeah.
But I think why that happens is because we're more comfortable with Jesus as a good moral teacher, because I can pick and choose the teachings that I want to live into, and when I am living into them and when I'm not living into them. Again, like compartmentalizing our lives.
Yeah.
When are we going to allow this good moral teacher to affect, to change our actions, and when are we not? Like, we are still in that scenario the ultimate sort of like harbinger of truth. Like, even if when we choose to follow is my decision. So epistata, Jesus as teacher, Jesus as good moral teacher, arm's length, we are still the ones in the position of Lord, because you choose when to follow and when not to follow. And the conversion, like the fear for Peter is, oh no, you're the Lord. That means I'm not. And that means everything in my life needs to now change and shift around you being the Lord and not me being the Lord.
Man.
Yeah. So easier said than done.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Right. Yeah. And that's where, some of the practical things of discipleship, being a disciple, being a follower of Jesus, apprenticeship, to use Dallas Willard's language, guys like John Mark Comer, who have just brilliantly, I think, translated Dallas Willard and brought it into contemporary life
for
and
millennials
context.
like us.
Exactly. Like, there are people out there doing this in fantastic ways. Books like The Good and Beautiful God, Good and Beautiful Community, really practical workings out of what it means to become a follower of Jesus. But that is why at the end of the day, I still like the really practical language around whether it's, discipleship is a churchy word, but apprenticeship or being a follower of Jesus. Because you can boil down, and maybe we should do this as like another special episode of a podcast. You can boil it down to disciplines, where we say at the end of the day, it's really hard to say over and over again, Jesus is Lord of my life, and to surrender. Like it can still cause a lot of fear, but it is where we say, okay, let's take one spiritual practice or discipline that we just know is good. Or let's take one area of our life and say, okay, finances for this year. Like how are we going to allow Jesus to get a hold of that in practical everyday ways? Because I think the practical working out of it is where it goes from being this big sort of even ethereal, conceptual, scary in many ways thought to be like, how do I even begin to do that? Because again, like I go back to what Jesus did. He didn't start with leave everything. He said, can I get in your boat? And would you just like float me out so I can talk to these people?
Let me into your life a little bit. See what I can do.
Yep. Yeah. And watch, right? Like Jesus earns Simon's trust in this. So he's there and he teaches. He's like, let's just go out a little bit further. And it's almost like this invitation and watch what I'll do. So that's what Jesus calls it. Like, don't think about 10 steps down the road. Think about what is the one next step that Jesus is calling you to take? Yeah. Because it might be to say, okay, get in the boat. Like, let's get in the boat. Yeah. And it might be, let's go out a little deeper. It might be the invitation to watch what he's doing and to see it. And it might be the leave everything. But the everything doesn't happen immediately. It's first the boat. And in some ways, it's like, Simon, do I have your attention? Right? Like, will you at least, like, can I get in the boat? Are you paying enough attention? Did you even realize that I was in your boat, Simon? Like, or are you so sleepy? Yeah. So they're like, it really is like, where are you looking? Are you even looking at Jesus? And Simon goes, I'm paying that much attention. Like I'm still awake enough. And he goes out, and then like Jesus is like, okay, now let's go out deeper and put your nets in. So now Jesus is demanding something of actually his occupation, right? So it's like, do I have your attention? And then are you willing to give me this one thing? And if you give me this one thing, watch what I'll do. He does it. And then he says, okay, now come follow me and watch how much more you'll do. Yeah. Or I'll do and you'll do through. Like that I think is a good push against when I feel like, the overwhelm of everything.
And again, that all or nothing trap that we can, so easily get into of if I can't, if I can't give Jesus every square inch of my life this exact instant, then I'm a failure and I should just give him nothing, you know? Yeah. Whereas like, no, like just baby steps, little bit by little bit, we can start to give Jesus these parts of our lives and see what he does with them. Yeah.
So even to ask, whether you're in prayer or of like a spouse, a partner, a friend, a community, a small group, one of us, like one of the questions might be to ask where other people see you being called to take that step. Right. So maybe in a marriage, it is like finances. This is something that we've not actually committed to Jesus, and it's causing us tremendous anxiety. And we're constantly fighting about it, and there's always worry. And listen, like there's a lot to be concerned about in the world in which we live, but there's just, for some reason, they're just like every time you come to that conversation, there's defensiveness and anger and resentment and bitterness and this. So you go, hey, maybe that's God saying this is something that you've not surrendered. Yeah. And so again, what's that? Like pick a season of life. Say for this amount of time, we're going to try to do this one thing surrendered to Jesus. Yeah. Because maybe you're nailing you're involved in a small group, you're doing Bible studies, and you're, involved in worship, and you're serving, and you are helping out in the food cupboard, and you are, knee deep, elbows deep in dirt when the farm, like when our garden opens up, and you're doing, and then there's this one thing that Jesus says, hey, but you still haven't surrendered that one. But like, listen for that piece.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. That sounds like a good logical place for us to close out. And so if you have any questions, we've received some great thoughts and some kind of questions that may come to light later on in the book of Luke. But we encourage you to feedback more. You can send those questions to questions@courtrightchurch.org, and we'll take a look at them and incorporate them into whether it may or may not be one of these ones where we're specifically dealing with the text from the previous Sunday. It may be another one where we just kind of do some, the whole podcast is a question and response. We're looking forward to your feedback and hope that you will utilize this as you talk with family, with friends, with small groups, whatever that looks like for you. We hope that you'll take advantage of this.